Our studies often overlook Southeast Asian societies, but a new centre in Singapore looking at the health profiles of Chinese, Malays and Indians hopes to prevent illnesses caused by ageing. For a better understanding of just how all of this will help Singaporeans, let's speak to the director of the NUHS Centre for Healthy Longevity, Professor Brian Kennedy, and co-director Professor Andrea Maier. Professor Kennedy, thank you for joining us to understand what your centre plans to do. Now, if I understand it, it's so that if we better understand the ageing process, we can perhaps intervene earlier to prevent the kinds of problems we can expect. And by looking more closely at how different ethnic groups in Singapore age, we might make this intervention more nuanced. Is this what, in essence, what this study plans to do?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. We know that aging is the major driver of chronic diseases. And not only that, it causes mortality due to COVID-19, and it causes functional decline. So people are not as able to do things as they like as they get older. I think that what we're trying to do is understand why aging is driving these diseases, be able to measure how people are aging in the population, and to develop interventions that will slow or reverse aspects of aging. Our idea is that we want to intervene while people are still healthy and keep them healthy as long as possible. So in other words, extend health span, not lifespan.
To keep them healthy as long as possible. From what I read of the study, the specific target is to enhance this disease-free lifespan by 5 more years. So why this decision to choose 5 and not more or fewer, more years or fewer years? Why 5?
Actually, I'm hopeful we can do more than 5, but there are a number of interventions that already exist that work in animal models, for instance, mice. In fact, if you're a mouse, we've got you covered already. We know what to do. But what we're trying to do, and together working with Andrea, is to test these interventions in humans, validate which interventions work for which people, and then implement them in the population. And you mentioned the ethnic issue is really critical. We have Malay, Chinese, and Indians in Singapore, as you know, and we know very little about the aging of the Malay and Indian population. So we need to not only test interventions, but we also need to understand what's different about aging in these different ethnicities and develop personalized interventions to optimize everyone's health span.
Professor Maier, let's bring you in on the conversation here. The issue of Asian genomics sequencing, we know that there's a gap of data there. So when you get this information in terms of studying these ethnic communities, for the Chinese, for the Indians, for Malays, what are you going to do with this data?
First of all, it's very important to capture all of the ethnicities living in Singapore in one of the environments and learning from that. And it's not only genetic data we are going to cover, but also epigenetic data, which is the layer on top of the genes, but also looking at metabolomics, which means how our cells actually interfering with what we eat, for example. So that's what we are doing on cellular level. But most importantly, that we are also looking at lifestyle. So is the lifestyle different in the same environment in Singapore in different ethnicities? And we also look at psychological factors. What is the quality of life of individuals? How depressed possibly are individuals, and how is their cognitive function? And all these layers of a biological phenotyping together with a very good psychological phenotyping and a lifestyle phenotyping. We are bringing all the data together to build databases and to build, in the end, very specific aging clocks to determine the biological age, being ethnicity dependent, possibly, if there are big differences.
And Professor Maier, it's a lot to cover. So what's the time frame for actually getting sufficient data to sort of develop this biomarker using artificial intelligence? How are doctors actually going to use it?
We are not there yet for the real implementation into mass market, for example, in outpatient clinics. However, we try, of course, to do that and to already open outpatient clinics. For example, in Alexandra Hospital, we will do that early next year to bring what we know into clinical practice. So it's an endeavor. It takes a couple of years doing not only observational studies, but most importantly, intervention studies that we are testing how to reverse the aging process. How can we reverse the biological age to make somebody biologically younger? That's very important. And then see what the effect is to implement it eventually in clinical practice around Singapore, but also around the world.
And a final question for you, Professor Brian Kennedy. I was interested when you said, if you're a mouse, we've got you covered. In fact, to be able to say that you can manage aging for mice seems to me hugely impressive. What have you learned from mice? And would it be simply a case of expanding it, extending it, making it more complex to manage the aging of human beings? Final question.
Yeah, I think that people assume that aging is inevitable, it's not changeable, but we've learned that it's very malleable in animal models. So we can extend lifespan by 30 or even 50% sometimes. And when we do that, the animals are healthy longer too. That could be with natural products or supplements. It could be with drugs. It could be with dietary changes or some combination. So we have many different possibilities for things that work in animals and might work in humans. The key thing now is to get into the clinic and validate which things work in humans. Because if we can really stop doing so much sick care and really do health care, intervene before people get sick and keep them healthy as long as possible, then what we're going to achieve is both an extreme quality of life victory and also an economic victory. Healthy people are good for the economy. So it's about taking what we already know from a lot of basic research and implementing it first in the clinic and then in the community. And I think it can be achievable.
Thanks for making time for us this evening. Professors, Director of the NUHS Centre of Healthy Longevity, Professor Brian Kennedy, and Co-Director, Professor Andrea Maier. Thanks so much.